Those of you guys who have never been, this is pretty usual. There's always food, so show up early. There's always, we like it when there's a scarcity of seating, so it's better to show up earlier rather than later. But in general, next time, tell friends, bring more people. We are joined by Professor Michael Munger.
Yeah!
Shy and humble scholar at Duke University. Former chair of that department, political science, former editor of the journal Choice. It is not that he was fired from either of those positions, but they are thankless jobs that no one really wants, and so they just had a wonderful track as moved on to bigger and better things, including former contender for the governorship of North Carolina. Sort of YouTube famous, the Kane's High rap battle videos you might have seen. But in general, a very talented and established scholar in the tradition of public choice economics. So without further ado, Professor Munger.
Thanks very much. Fluid last night was presented with an economics problem, which I thought I would present to you. I arrived in New Orleans, which is a major international airport, at 8 p.m., so not in the middle of the night. Go outside. It was an hour wait for a taxi. Had to wait in line an hour for a taxi. Why? Ma'am. You?
Because there's
Oh, yes, there's not enough taxis. That's right, in every unimportant sentence. Why weren't there enough taxis?
I know that taxis recently had to have like credit card things, so it's like more like that's like a cost to the taxi cab company. So like the cost of owning a taxi is more expensive. I know that going from New Orleans Airport to the downtown region isn't a very profitable trip for the taxi cab anyway. So there's no reason.
Well, why would it not be very profitable? Yes, sir.
Yeah, price control technology. You can't charge you a certain amount.
Fixed price, $33. It doesn't matter how many people are in line. I would have paid 20, 30, 50 more. Not just an hour. It was cold. That's another thing I'm pissed off about. It's cold. I'm not going to blame the city for that. Would that be enough? It's always $33. No, it turns out I did a little digging, and there's a new municipal regulation that if you take someone from the airport, you're not allowed to take a fare back. Taxi cabs are not allowed to deliver passengers to the airport if they have picked up someone from the airport. So you have to deadhead back. The only reason you would go back to the airport is if you think you're not going to have to wait in line very long. That information doesn't get to the taxi cabs very often. So that combination, no price response when there's scarcity, $33 no matter what, and you have to drive back with no passenger. Now all of this was designed to benefit the hotel shuttles. So the political deal between your mayor, who was heavily supported by the hotel shuttles and the hotels, this deal was cut. It's pretty harmful to consumers. So I tweeted about this and said that what I needed to give you some price gouging. And of course, got a bunch of responses saying, oh no, price gouging is wrong. But price gouging would have solved the problem. And in fact, some entrepreneurs, some heroes of entrepreneurship were price gouging on the side, walking up to these schmoes in line. Look, come on, I'll take you for an extra $20. They're breaking the law, but they were heroes because it was making the line shorter for me. I didn't want to take a chance because who knows what's going to happen. But the brave people in front of me that were being taken out, well, I hope they were literally being taken out. But they were able to negotiate a contract. I was not able to negotiate a contract. I was prevented from negotiating a contract that clearly would have benefited both me and the people who were willing to provide the taxi services. So, I just thought I would start with that. So, there's three things that I wanted to talk about today. I've worked for a while on the ethics and consequences of voluntary exchange. The ethics and consequences of voluntary exchange. I'm interested in the circumstances under which exchange is voluntary. And in philosophy, I'm the director of the EBU program, which is Philosophy, Politics, and Economics. Philosophers and economists kind of talk past each other on what is voluntary. If you'd like, we can talk about that more in the questions. But what I wanted to do is try to spell out fairly quickly, and I'm going to go through these like lightning. I'm happy to share with Professor D'Amico this PowerPoint. To anybody who wants the PowerPoint is welcome to it. There's some references and links in it for you to be able to follow up. But what I'm offering then, since I'm doing that, I'm going to go too fast. Let me distinguish two things that y'all probably are pretty good at distinguishing already. Profits are the excess of revenues from selling a product after the costs are subtracted. If the exchange is voluntary, then every person buying the product thinks she's better off. If you're a subjectivist, it means you think they are in fact better off. You're willing to credit them with the ability to make that judgment. Entrepreneurs seek profits and therefore try to create value. In a system like that, if exchanges are voluntary, the person who makes the greatest profits is actually creating the greatest social value. That's not a perspective that we encounter very often in the political world. But as a matter of fact, under those conditions, whoever makes the most profits must be producing the most high-value transactions. And if the exchange is voluntary, you're actually making more people better off. Rent-seeking is a competition for an artificial prize or benefit that's created either by taking money away from taxpayers and giving it away through subsidies, or a restriction on competition that allows an artificial increase in prices for the product sold. Political entrepreneurs then seek rents, and no value is created. One of the problems is that I think we're not very good at distinguishing between these two kinds of entrepreneurship. Some of the entrepreneurs that we celebrate are in fact just very successful at seeking rents. And in an accounting sense, if you look, they're making profits. You can make profits from successful rent seeking. So you need to try to look at the conditions under which the profits are being created. So political entrepreneurs seek rents and no value is created. This was an actual ad that I took off of YouTube. Some of y'all may have seen this, but I found this to be pretty remarkable. If your age is 50 to 54, you can be approved for Social Security disability benefits even if you're still able to work, as long as your past work was not skilled or semi-skilled. To learn more about the special rules that make it easier to get approved for disability benefits, click for a free evaluation by an experienced Social Security disability attorney. So what we have is a bunch of really smart people who have gone to law school, who are spending all of their creative abilities trying to find ways to go before a judge and get their client declared disabled so that for the rest of their life they can get Social Security disability payments. That's very profitable for those attorneys. But of course it's not creating value. What it is seeking a rent. No value is created by them. They're competing for a transfer. So it only takes 2 minutes to see if you are qualified. So if you want to think of an example of rent seeking, keep that one in mind. And there was on NPR of all places, on NPR, a brilliant story about the extent to which some places have just been taken over by this seeking of disability. Now, I don't mean in any way to diminish the fact that some people are actually disabled. They depend on this for their livelihood. But this NPR story talks about a town in Alabama where 40% of the citizens are living on Social Security disability because they have several really good, highly motivated attorneys and a sympathetic judge. Well, let me compare two ways of choosing. How do markets choose and how do polities choose? And when you say as many things as John Kenneth Galbraith did, some of them are bound to be right. And here's one of the things that he did say that was right. In economics, things always happen at the margin. The majority is always wrong. So let's consider the three mechanisms for motivating people and for making choices. Market's the profit test. Rent seeking, we either get the rent or we get a subsidy. And politics is appeal to the median voter. So firms, as you know, decide the quantity of output, price, wages, labor, cost of capital, quantity of capital, a production function. Production function combines capital and labor into quantity. We have some prices that are costs, so wages and interest, those are costs. We have some prices that are cost of output. And profits are the value of the stuff we sell, P times Q, minus our labor costs, wages times L, minus our capital costs, amount of capital times R. So profits are equal to total revenue minus labor costs minus capital costs. Well, what does it mean if there's something left over after I paid my workers and I paid for my capital? What does it mean substantively? Some of my questions were rhetorical, this one's not. What does it mean? It means profits, yes, but that's this identity. What does that mean? It means value has been created in the economy. A new value, something new under the sun exists. A new value is created. Someone is better off. And if the price that consumers pay, this P, is less than the maximum amount they would have created, there's even more value than this created. There's an invisible value that's created, there's some consumer surplus. But I know for sure that some value has been created if there are positive profits, because I know for sure that consumers are willing to pay more for this stuff than it costs to make. And for some reason, we lose sight of the enormous power of that signal. That test. It's hard for me to know how much something is worth. If a firm passes this test, it's creating value. How much value? Well, it depends on the amount of its profits, provided that it's producing this stuff under conditions of competition. So not all profits are produced this way. Some profits are produced by a rent seeking. But if profits are produced this way, we know that value is being created. So this is one of my favorite passages. Let me say, y'all are young, I'm old. This was from a movie by a man named Oliver Stone, a movie called Wall Street. And this is Michael Douglas's character.
Greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Greed is right. Greed works. Greed clarifies, cuts through, and captures the essence of evolutionary spirit. Greed in all of its forms. Greed for life, for money, for love, knowledge, has marked the upward surge of mankind, and greed, you mark my words, will not only save Teldar paper, but that other malfunctioning corporation called the USA. Thank you very much.
For some reason, our side allows itself to get sucked, by my side, I mean by our side, the side that advocates markets as a way of allocating resources. It allows itself to be sucked into that argument. Now, that's written by Oliver Stone. He's no fan of capitalism. And yet people say, you know, that's right, greed is good. Well, I'm 6'1", and I've always felt like I should be able to dunk a basketball. But not only can I not dunk, I can't touch the bottom of the net. It's hard for me to get both feet up. I can jump with one foot, but I can't get both feet up off the ground. So I actually think gravity is a problem. We need a system where there's less gravity. In terms of equity, it would be better if there were less gravity in my immediate vicinity. So let's design a system where there's less gravity. That seems silly. It's also silly to say, let's try to design a system that assumes no greed. The point is not that greed is good. The point is that greed is like gravity. Is there a system that we can use greed so that consumers rule? We want the people to be in charge. We want power to the people. Well, it turns out what capitalism does is it makes greed work in the service of the people. So the reason to have capitalism is not greed is good. The reason to have capitalism is that capitalism makes greedy people do what consumers want them to do. That's pretty darn cool. The argument for the use of markets really is price. Price provides both information and incentives. Sometimes we rely too much on the fact that it provides information. That's true. Socialists agree that that's true. What's interesting is that price also provides incentives. There's a variety of ways that that's true, but let me give you one that you may not have thought of. Suppose that several of us are standing in line after a hurricane, and what they're selling is generators, electrical generators. There's 4 of us standing in line, and we have an anti-price gouging law. We have a law that says price gouging is illegal. You can't raise your price above the price that it was before the hurricane. The price of the generator before the hurricane was $800. So he can't raise his price above $800. There's 4 of us in line, there's 1 generator. Now, I'm first in line, and I want to buy the generator so that I can keep my beer cold. And I'll pay up to $900 for it, so I'm willing to pay for it. Second guy in line wants to play Nintendo and be able to get on Facebook. Third person in line wants to be able to keep the insulin cold so his daughter doesn't die. Third guy in line would pay up to $2,000. I would pay up to $900. The price is constrained to $800. I buy the generator, there's no more generators. The price goes to infinity. The guy who would pay $2,000 now has no generator that he can buy. What would a moral person do? A moral person would not take something that somebody else needs more. A moral person would not take from his own use something that someone else needs more. But without the price signal, I don't know that. And so the first person in line buys it, I keep my beer cold, the daughter dies. That's immoral. It's immoral to prevent the price system from allocating resources and directing them to their highest valued use. It's immoral. In order to have morality and to have that moral principle that you don't use something that somebody else needs more, you have to let prices adjust. Price is far from a perfect organizing system. Far from a perfect organizing system. So again, economists often allow themselves to get sucked into a debate over whether markets are perfect. Of course they're not. The question is, what alternative could possibly be better? And I think that's what's not always understood by the public. So the reason that real socialism has always failed everywhere that it's been tried is that you don't have information and you don't have incentives. The success, if you actually look at measures of economic freedom, one of the things that people, when they're trying to torment libertarians, is they say, can you give me even one example of a free market society that's been successful? And then thinking they've won the debate, they smirk like this. I've seen it so often. I say, yes, Sweden. Holy cow, Sweden? I thought Sweden was a socialist country. Well, no. All of the means of production in Sweden are privately owned, and if you look at the international measures of economic freedom, it's easier to start a new business. In some ways, many ways, easier than the United States. Their school system depends entirely on vouchers. It's an entirely voucher-based school system. Their medical care system is entirely privately provided. Sweden is in many ways a libertarian utopia. So yes, I do have an example of a country that runs according to these principles, and it's Sweden. And they're growing pretty fast. So it's actually a pretty easy question to answer, but you have to think of things at the margin. At the margin, if we were to move in that direction, the United States in some ways would be better off if we were more like Sweden. The enormous number of restrictions that we have on starting new businesses. In New Orleans, in order to be a flower arranger, you have to have 1,500 hours of experience arranging flowers. Because, I mean, what would happen if some unlicensed flower arranger gets hired at a wedding? No, you know, maybe I had six surgeries on my left retina. My retina went from being aloof to completely detached. And I'll wait. And they reattached it. I actually would like for the surgeon to have credentials. Now, I think it's possible to have other credentials. You know, if you want to go to a movie, you can check Rotten Tomatoes. There's other ways to find out information than having government licensing. But okay, if we want to license retina surgeons, fair enough. Why in the world do we license flower arrangers? And the answer is that flower arrangers can make more profits if they can restrict entry into the flower arranging business. It's a rent-seeking problem. They make more profits if they can restrict entry. So Sweden actually doesn't have much of that kind of rent-seeking. They're actually pretty open. Let me tell 3 stories. The itinerant padre, the verger, and the bankier. The itinerant padre comes from an article in 1945 by an economist named Radford, who wrote about the economics of the POW camp. And of course, the itinerant padre would be a man of the cloth, because it's more funny if it's about a man of God. What the itinerant padre supposedly did was, everybody got these Red Cross packages. And it meant that everybody had exactly the same endowment of resources. And we have different preferences. If we have the same endowments and different preferences, you would expect exchange. And if there's an exchange, both parties to the exchange are better off, provided there's no fraud, no coercion, usual conditions of making it voluntary. I don't like carrots. You don't like beef. We exchange, we're both better off. And it's sort of interesting. There's no increase in the total amount of stuff. No increase in the total amount of stuff, but by allowing exchange, you make everyone better off. Well, the itinerant padre, supposedly, the story may be apocryphal, even it says so in the article, the itinerant padre started out with some cigarettes, some cheese, some crackers, some carrots. And he went around and exchanged and ended up with the cheese, cigarettes, crackers, and carrots, and a whole Red Cross package in addition. He made profits. And so the story was, gosh, wasn't he greedy? Was he? Yes, he was, because greed is like gravity. Was it bad? No, and in fact, they should have given him an award. He made more people better off than anybody else in the camp. If I had sat and not made any trades, I helped no one. We know for sure the itinerant padre, if he didn't defraud anyone, improved the welfare of more people than anyone else in the whole camp. How do we know? It's because he made such large profits through voluntary exchange. We know for sure that he made more people better off. And we don't know who and by what. Now the response usually is, yeah, but he made profits. That means he must have bought low and sold high. If those 2 people had met each other, they could have exchanged and eliminated the middleman. I think I should be able to dunk. Did I mention that? If you can just assume a counterfactual universe where those 2 people meet, yes. But why stop there? Why not get rid of gravity so we can fly? The point is, they didn't meet each other. That exchange was consummated by the result of the efforts of the itinerant padre. Did he deserve those profits? Maybe in some moral sense, it doesn't matter. He should be entitled to them, though, if for no other reason than the consequences are so good. There's a really great consequence to allowing people to buy and sell stuff that way. So many people were made better off. Second, the verger. The verger is a minor functionary in the Anglican Church. He lights the candles. He holds up the cassock of the priest when he's done. Maybe does some light yard work and looks distinguished. Distinguished fellow. Well, this is actually a short story by Somerset Maugham. Have you ever seen a short story? Oh man, it's so fantastic. Somerset Maugham is the short story. The verger has been working at St. Philip's for 30 years. Came there when he was 17, basically grew up there, and now looks very distinguished. All the people in the parish really like him. But he never learned to read or write. One day, the priest, he's an Anglican priest, says, you know, this is just embarrassing. This is the new Anglican church. We can't have a verger that can't read. We have to appeal to a new generation. And we're trying to deal here with people with Facebook, and this guy can't read. Yes, he lights the candles well, and the tradition's all fine. He folds my cassock beautifully. But we've got to do something about this. So they call him in and they say, look, we're sorry. You haven't done anything wrong. We really like you, but you've got to go because you can't read or write. Out he goes. Disconsolate. He says, darn, or something like that. Looks around and says, I need a smoke. He looks around and there's no tobacconist. wow, there's no tobacconist. I'm going to open a tobacconist shop. So he opens a tobacconist shop because on this whole street, there's no place to buy cigarettes. So he sells tobacco and candy. And he works hard at it, and he makes enough that he can use that same algorithm. It's not a complicated algorithm. You don't need to read or write to be able to count the number of tobacconists on a street. And if the number is 0, open one. Count, none. Okay, I'm going to open one. So he opened 20 tobacconists and operated these and made a fortune. He had 100,000 pounds, which at the time was a fortune, at the time this was written. Goes to the bank and says, I want to deposit this 100,000 in the bank, and I don't want to keep this myself, it's too dangerous. And the banker says, well, 100,000 pounds is a lot, you should let us manage this for you. And he said, I really don't know much about that, I just want to put it in the bank where it's safe. And the banker says, no, we've got these other products, these other investments, you should read about this. And he says, I'm sorry, I can't read. You have 100,000 pounds as an entrepreneur and you can't read? Imagine if you could read what you would have done. He says, I know exactly what I would have done. I'd be the verger at St. Philip's. So there was nothing very complicated about this. This wasn't the work of genius. Sometimes we want to think of entrepreneurs as geniuses that come up with new products. And maybe that happens sometimes. But it may be something as simple as a rule of thumb, my visual aid, rule of thumb that says, if there's no tobacconist, open one. Was that a good rule? I don't know. It turned out to be good for him. Sometimes people are going to come up with rules that are bad. It's very difficult for us to tell in advance whether it's a good rule or a bad rule. But we can hear the voice of prophets, not P-R-O-P-H-E-T. Sometimes we listen to the voice of the prophet, I suppose. But in this case, prophets speak to us, saying that was a good idea. Was this guy a genius? No, he couldn't read or write. Did he deserve the money? Well, it's certainly useful for us to say that as a matter of consequence that he did. It would be wrong for us to say, well, he got lucky, because that's not really true. He worked hard. Some people try and lose, some people try and win. Prophets directed him to use his greedy motivation to make people better off. And then the third story. Now, when you're an egotist, as I am, you Google yourself like 3 or 4 times a day. I may have to stop during the talk. You learn the origins of your name. Now, my name is Munger, M-U-N-G-E-R. It comes from the English word monger, M-O-N-G-E-R, M-O-N-G-E-R. You know, a seller, ironmonger, fishmonger. That comes from a Saxon word, Munger. And there was, in the 11th century, about 1050, there was a psalter. It's almost like a Canterbury Tales. So the people don't have names, they have characteristics. So the Munger describes what he does. And the Munger is a merchant. And this is actually my family crest. It looks like it is a drunk crow and 4 onions. 5 onions. There's nothing very noble about it. But that, so the Munger, the Saxon Munger, described himself this way. So, and if you're actually interested, I can't imagine why you would be, but Sharon Turner is the source for this. Now, I have a hard time not reading this with a Monty Python voice, so I'm going to do my best. I say, I am useful to the king, and to aldermen, to the rich, and to all people. I ascend to my ship with my merchandise, and I sail over the sea like Nisus. And I sell my things, and I buy dear things which are not produced in this land. I bring them to you here with great danger over the sea. I died 3 times. I got that too. Sometimes I suffer shipwreck with the loss of all my things, barely escaping myself. And the interlocutor says, what things do you bring us? And he gives a list: silk, skins, copper, tin. Will you sell your things here as you brought them here? And we sort of, this is a tough question. Does he improve them in any way? Is there any evidence that he puts them together, produces something new? Because a lot of times people will say, yeah, you built something with it. he did was take his big ass over somewhere else in a ship, load it up, bring it here, and unload it. And he expects us to pay. Will you sell your things here as you brought them here? I will not, because that will my labor benefit me. I will sell them dearer here than I bought them there, that I may get some profit to feed me, my wife, and children. This is in 1050. It's an amazingly modern view. Of course, to be fair, I read this and I say, yeah! And that's not the point you're supposed to take. He's a bad guy. He's greedy. He's a bad guy. He should just bring it here and sell it for the same price. You know, maybe something for his trouble. But he's going to charge the highest price he can get. What a rat. I see it and say, the profit is what made him do it. And that's good. If somebody else wants to do it too, the profits may well be driven down to the point where the costs are lower and everyone will benefit. What stuff did he bring? Did he bring stuff that he likes? He brings stuff he thinks consumers will like. Now maybe he's trying to guess. Maybe he did a survey. Maybe he looked on his Facebook page and see the stuff that people like. If you want me to bring orichalcus, like orichalcus. He was trying to guess what consumers wanted. Consumers rule. And yes, it's true that he's trying to charge the highest price that he can get. But he's trying to charge a price that's the highest he can get, which means that people are willing to pay even more than that. Their benefit. Everyone who buys this expects to benefit. It's the consumers who are greedy. Consumers' greed is being served here. Everyone who buys the stuff that he brings values it even more than the price that they're paying. They're all benefiting. So, an entrepreneur. I have till 3. Put up a bump. An entrepreneur is a person who organizes and operates a business, taking on financial risks to do so. What's a political entrepreneur? In the United States, we've come more and more to depend on political entrepreneurs rather than the sort of classical entrepreneurs in that definition. An entrepreneur might make iPods. A political entrepreneur might make solar panels. If I'm making iPods, I'm selling it to consumers. If I'm making solar panels, I'm selling it to the government. Yes, consumers receive it, but I'm selling it for the subsidy. And it may be hard to keep those separate, because if I'm invested in a company and I notice that they earn profits, what that means is they're earning an excess over their costs for the stuff that they sell. But is the origin consumers who actually want this, or subsidies that the government wants consumers to want this? So, one way to tell is if your research and development team is lobbyists and not scientists. If you look at your sales team and they're lobbyists and they're trying to sell it to Congress, that's political entrepreneurship. If you look and your sales team is marketers trying to sell to consumers or retail outlets, that's economic entrepreneurship. So market entrepreneurs build their business with private funds, using their own money or funds from investors. They succeed by giving the public useful goods or services. They hire engineers and salespeople to sell to people. Political entrepreneurs sell to Congress. And which group benefits the society more? Well, there was an interesting example. And if I were to ask you, the correct answer here is the first line, but if I were to ask you, who had the first steamship in the United States? You, all having been propagandized, would say, well, that was Robert Fulton. Well, Vanderbilt had the first purely commercially successful one. So I would accept that as an answer for the commercially successful one. John Fitch was the first working steamship. He failed. The steamship that he had these odd sort of oars that paddled instead of, the technology wasn't very good. It is true that in almost all the history books you look at, the answer is Robert Fulton. And it was commercially successful. Largely because it received so many subsidies from the state. It received subsidies of two types. It received direct subsidies, and he bought an exclusive patent, an exclusive right to run the steamship line. So the Claremont went from New York City to Albany. It took 2 days by horse-drawn coach. It took a day and a half, obviously, on the Claremont, but that was still better, and it could really carry an enormous amount of heavy cargo. He got a monopoly from the New York legislature to carry all steamboat traffic, and insisted that his monopoly meant that nobody else could ferry passengers to New York City, even from neighboring states. Thomas Gibbons of New Jersey decided to contest this. And he hired Cornelius Vanderbilt, as the gentleman said. This was before Vanderbilt began operating his own steamship line. This was the young Vanderbilt. And on the mast of Gibbons' ship, Vanderbilt hoisted a flag that read, "New Jersey must be free," which is an excellent motto for entrepreneurship, as I can imagine. This to him actually was about freedom from state control. And Cornelius Vanderbilt, if you were to ask pretty much anybody in high school or college history class, is an evil robber baron. Absolutely evil. But New Jersey must be free. So, interestingly, the boats that were trying to capture and stop Vanderbilt weren't fast enough. So he was able to outrun them. He was smuggling passengers. These are like the mosquito boats that come into Miami with marijuana from South America that are smuggling marijuana. Vanderbilt was illegally smuggling passengers into New York, and the other boats just weren't fast enough to catch him. Eventually he was stopped, and the case was Gibbons versus Ogden, which, when you read about this in the history of the Supreme Court, you don't get this subtext. This was about the Commerce Clause and whether states could regulate interstate commerce. Well, in a way it was. What it really was about economic freedom. And Cornelius Vanderbilt was the one that brought this. Was he greedy? Yes. Yes, he was. His greed led him to produce faster, cheaper steamboat rides, which is what consumers wanted. So the profit system meant that greed worked in the service of consumer sovereignty. Well, after Gibbons versus Ogden, the system was opened up. There was a lot of competition. Prices fell rapidly. And, well, the Folsom book, The Myth of the Robber Barons, is one place you can get this story. It's a terrific book that contrasts. And his steamship story is interesting because within the steamship industry, there's political entrepreneurs and real entrepreneurs. And for a very long time, the political entrepreneurs won because the amount of the public subsidies were so substantial that the state would say, well, we've got this investment in them, we're also going to protect their monopoly. So if your costs are subsidized and the state uses guns to kill competitors, that's bound to be an advantage over your competitors. But eventually, in this industry at least, competition went out. So we make a distinction between profits, which we've already talked about, the excess of revenues from selling the product, and rent seeking, which is a competition for an artificial price, and again, no value is created. So if more people are willing to pay to cover the cost of production and distribution, the question is it good? This is a hard example, folks. And y'all are old enough that this actually happened in 1978. I think it was 78. I got this as a Christmas present. Which probably explains a lot. It appears to be, and on closer inspection, turns out to be a rock in a box. It's got air holes cut in it, so the rock won't expire. Is that a good product? Absolutely. So many people bought this. This is a bad product, guys. So this is Kid Rock, and he's wearing a wife beater made out of beer tub cans. Anyway, I'm sorry, you're gonna have nightmares about it. 1975, 1970, very dull. Pets are just too much work. And this was, you know, the little electronic ones that they had in Japan. These are just rocks. There's nothing else going on except the rock. Gray stones that he bought at a builder's supply store. He made custom cardboard boxes. It hit right December 75. By February 76, he started to have to discount them. He sold 1.5 million of these pet rocks. They came with a 32-page official training manual, which was a lot of its success. You could treat the tricks. Sit and stay were easy. Roll over, you just helped it. Kill was not hard. It was a big enough rock. It was very well done, and people bought it. Body training, it was simple. It wasn't hard to... He had found a way. He was doing a printing job for a client. He just tacked this on to the main job. There wasn't much cost for him. Was he greedy? Of course. Was this a good product? Look, a bunch of people bought it and felt like they were better off. I still remember it. It was great when I got this for Christmas. I was a badass in high school. I got a pet rock. He did get sued for patent infringement, but other people had said they had the same idea. But to be fair, it was the 32-page booklet that really said he was inspired. So seriously, people had tried to steal it. There was an update with USB. It was added functionality.
What?
Well, I mean, having the USB adds. I'm going to go on. So, was it worth building that? A lot of people were better off. It didn't cost very much. How do markets decide? Maybe markets decide in ways that seem to us are going to result in a lot of pet rocks. How do polities decide? Where markets decide at the margin, as even Kenneth Galbraith recognized, polities decide in the middle. Let's suppose that we have a town and there's 5 of us. 5 people in the town are trying to decide how much salt to put on the roads. Now I should explain, because I realized a couple of weeks ago it was impossible to get across the bridge. Salt is something that people up north use when it's cold. There's no reason for New Orleans to have salt because it doesn't get cold. It's a peak load problem. It would be dumb to have all this capacity when once every 5 years there's a little bit of ice. But 2 weeks ago, y'all were shut down. So, but places up north, even I'm from North Carolina, even we have some budget for salt. The question is, how big should it be? How much should we consider spending on salt? Well, Mr. A has azaleas. He doesn't want salt because the salt will wash up the road and kill it. B would spend enough to clear the main road. C would want a little bit more, salting the side roads a bit. D advocates a clear roads for all kind of budget. And Mr. E not only likes clear roads, he hates azaleas, and so he wants a lot of salt. So we look at the horizontal axis down there, and we can match people to their preferences. Now, what will this polity choose? The answer is the middle. Preferences in the middle, the median. How do you know? Why do you know that the 10,000 will be the winning salt budget? Well, suppose not. Suppose we're at 11,000. A, B, and C would vote for 10. Suppose we're at 9,000. C, D, and E would vote for 10. So anything below, you're going to move up because 3 people are for it. Anything above, you'll move down because 3 people are for it. Politics always chooses in the middle. Now suppose that Mr. E, well, he has a couple of bad days. In addition to hating azaleas, says, all right, we're choosing this 10,000. Mr. E goes nuts. He's on jihad. He wants to end ice as we know it. He wants a salt budget of 2.5 million. He goes around handing out end ice as we know it, pamphlets, and people are hiding. It's E, don't answer the door. I don't want to hear about that ice. What happens? Nothing. Nothing. Changes at the margins don't affect political choices. Changes at the margin don't affect political choices. The choice is made by the middle. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's a bad thing. So, again, 10,000 is still the same. So there's no effect, and in particular, we don't move to the average. The measure of the middle that is relevant is not the average, it's the median. The median voter is the one that wins. Well, how would politics be at evaluating new products? You probably see where I'm going. How would politics be at evaluating new products? Could you appeal at the margin? No, you have to appeal to the middle. Steve Jobs said, you can't ask consumers what they want and then try to give it to them. By the time you get it built, they want to see something new. In the end, then he said, in the end, for something this complicated, it's really hard to design products by focus groups. A lot of times people don't know what they want until you show it to them. So people thought they wanted CD players and maybe tape decks. There was a product, the Sony Walkman, that everybody had. They listened to the little cassette tapes. And then Steve Jobs said, that doesn't make any sense. Music can be digital. There's no reason to have it on a physical medium. You can store it on hard drives. Wiped out the Sony Walkman. Nobody knew they wanted that until they saw it, and then they wanted it. Not that many people wanted it at first. So Israel Kirzner said, and this is a metaphor, but it's a useful one, what entrepreneurs do, what some entrepreneurs do, is they can see around corners. You have to be able to see around the corner. That product doesn't exist. I imagine something new. And if I build that, people will buy it. Maybe it's a pet rock. But maybe it's an iPod. So political entrepreneurs have to sell to the median voter to try to win rent. Economic entrepreneurs have to sell at the margin. So political entrepreneurs trying to sell solar panels. Here's a list of the companies that went bankrupt in 2009 to 2010, and then 2011, and then 2012. What do these bankruptcies mean? Well, they just failed to make enough subsidies. These companies were producing solar panels. They were trying to sell to the government. Maybe solar panels are a good thing, but consumers didn't want to buy them, and they didn't sell enough to the median. Products fail all the time. If you don't get subsidies, you lose your own money. You're operating at the margin, not trying to persuade the median voter. It is important to recognize that 56% of Americans believe in space aliens. So the median voter believes in space aliens. Not the concept, the actual existence. Maybe they haven't visited yet. Do you want that person making decisions about scientific investments? This is the right way for products to go. In the late 1950s, this is a man named Soichiro. Japanese Ministry of International Trade and Industry decided they needed to streamline the Japanese automobile industry. They wanted, there was economies of scale, design and production. They wanted to be able to compete with the US. They wanted to make inroads in the US market. And in retrospect, it's hard to believe that there weren't many cars made by Japan in the US, but in the 1950s there weren't. So the Japanese government and Miki decided that they were going to rationalize the industry. And this guy, Soichiro, had an automobile company, but it was decided that just two auto companies, Toyota and Nissan, would get government support. The median voter in Japan thought it would be better to have two large companies than a number of small competitive companies. All the other companies were told they should direct their energies to motorcycles, blenders, those new television things. Costs are going to fall, we're going to have lower cost if we have fewer producers. So this guy was kind of a jerk, Soichiro was. He didn't listen. He'd been making bicycles and motorcycles. So in 1959, in spite of the bleeding of meat, they produced their first S30, S360 sports car. And of course, his last name was Honda. So Soichiro prevented his company from being eliminated by the median voter because he thought at the margin they could appeal to voters, that is, consumers, in the US. So that was his first product. That's a motorcycle. It doesn't really look like one, but it's a motorcycle. It's a bicycle with a little engine on it. Think of Hondas now. It's hard to imagine a more iconic automobile company. It would have been eliminated if the Japanese government, if the median voter of Japan had his way. And, well, you could rice them out if you want. Hard to imagine doing without it. 1976, two Steves in the garage. One worked for Hewlett Packard, the other for Atari. The Atari guy was Steve Jobs. Steve Wozniak was the HP guy. What could possibly have gone wrong with this plan? They decided they would make a computer and sell it to people, and to make it memorable, the price point would be $666.66. So that they could identify it with, I don't know, Satan! It didn't work out very well. I think they sold like 6. So these were Apple I's, and they're worth a lot now because they didn't sell many. So if we take in a vote at that point, those $2,350, it had no memory and 16K of RAM. So it wasn't a very good calculator as far as we're concerned. Nobody knew anything about this, and in fact, in 1980, they rolled out $9,000 for an Apple III. They have no chance of ever making any money. They had a public stock offering in 1980. They sold 4.6 million shares. Did that mean the median voter bought a share of this stock? Well, no. The population of the United States then was 250 million. They only sold 4.6 million. So there's only way out there at the margin. These are people as crazy as Mr. E, the salt guy. These are nuts. Only nutty people bought this. But as a result, they were able to raise enough capital to start to produce personal computers. Everybody was betting no. So the business editor at Prentice Hall had said, I have traveled the length and breadth of this company, and I've talked with the best people. And I assure you, data processing is a fad that won't last out the year. The IBM guy, this is it, IBM, said, well, this microchip, what is it good for? There's no hope that anybody would want a computer in their home. 1978, the founder and CEO of DEC. These are computer manufacturers. There's no hope of doing this. There's no way that the median voter would ever have thought that this innovation was useful. Now, he was right in every unimportant way. Not many people did want home computers, just a few people at the margin. But by 1985, 5% of American households had voted yes. So in economics, the margin matters. In politics, the middle matters. Those are really different ways of choosing. Finally, 2005, by then, 60% of households had at least one computer. And eventually, the rest of us came along, free riding on the correct guess. And Apple makes enormous profits. And we look at that, and we look at the fact that these Apple computers are assembled in sweatshops, and say they must be evil. And the evidence that they're evil is that they make all these profits. I'd like you to consider, at least, the alternative possibility that profits and choosing at the margin are at least one important way of allowing consumers to be in charge, to accept the fact that greed as a motivation is a really important part of what makes people act, and that a profit-based system harnesses greed in service of consumer sovereignty, and that we need to be solicitous of choice at the margin rather than trusting choices at the median. Thanks for listening, and I'm happy to take your questions. We have like 1 minute. We have plenty of time. Surely I pissed somebody off.
In regards to the median deciding, I mean, it seems that in a general sense, sure, politicians need to win median votes, but it seems that voters would want to dedicate or delegate people to making decisions. I mean, you could still argue that very smart people on the margins are the ones making the decisions that are just held accountable to the median voter. What would be the response to that?
The reason that I didn't cite voters, but I cited experts about microcomputers is exactly that reason. We actually have to allow people to make mistakes. So by margin, I literally mean margin, not the sort of the people at the advanced, most cutting edge. That would be great if we could say, and you know, for drugs, for nuclear power, I believe that. I don't think that we should let marginal nuts like Mr. Eat the Salt guy decide things. But we're going to get some pet rocks. We're also going to get some microcomputers that the experts themselves think will never work. And so that's exactly the reason that I chose. I tried to look at what the experts believe within the industry. And they thought there's no chance. They would have said no. So the median voter would have appointed a blue ribbon commission. The blue ribbon commission would have studied this and said there's no chance, let's shut it down. And we would never have developed it if the government had been in charge. So it is a fair objection. It is possible, but I just think you need some people like the Virgin who just have bizarre, idiosyncratic rules of thumb, and they look and they find stuff other people don't find. Steve Jobs was a jerk, but he could see around corners. And of course, if all I can see is what's ahead of me, I'm going to say, no, that's not going to work. So for some things, that's right. But I think we have to allow people who try to see around the corner, visionaries.
Michael, allow me to interrupt you. I just want to make a quick announcement. I'm Walter Block. I'm a professor of economics. The economics department has two programs. This is one of them. The other is on Friday afternoons tomorrow at 3:30 to 5:30, where we have a seminar we have for some readings. So if any of you are interested in the other possibility, just email me. I'm wblock@winout.edu, and I'll give you information about that. It's a meeting 3:30 to 5:30, where we go over a certain reading tomorrow and then go on to dinner. wblock.
And Walter's famous. He's been in the New York Times lately. So don't miss this chance, yes.
Like you said, capitalism is small in every state. But what different people like millionaire values a dollar less than poor guy. So like the guy just offers $1 million for keeping his beer cold, and the other guy doesn't have that much money and wants his stuff.
Interestingly, I would say even the people who can't afford the higher price should oppose price gouging laws. So in my example, I tried to take a simple case where there is a fixed amount of the resource we're trying to allocate it to its highest value use. I think a plausible objection to that is that that gives too much power to wealth, because they have more to vote with. So I may not have much, my daughter may be dying, but I can't afford, and the rich guy will pay $10,000 because he wants this generator, and that doesn't seem right. Well, suppose the rich guy offers $10,000 for the generator. There'll be truckloads of generators coming. So I think the real answer is the supply response. The paradox is, in order to have low prices, you have to allow high prices. In order to have low prices, you have to allow high prices, because it's both a signal and an incentive. Now, the remarkable thing to me is that after Hurricane Katrina, anybody know what a siege is? S-I-E-G-E?
Like a siege? Like a siege? Like I'm imagining like a castle with like siege engines.
Go with that. And what else?
Oh, like you'll have like the castle or city or whatever is cut off from all supplies, so like no one can get in.
No. And what happens to them?
I mean, the whole idea is that
They starve.
Yeah.
They're dying. And the army's surrounding them, preventing stuff from coming in. Does that sound like Hurricane Katrina to you? Yes. Yes, the U.S. Army laid siege to an American city. Truckloads of supplies were brought to the border and turned away. What did they say? Y'all might sell that. Y'all might sell that, you bastards. We can't let that in. Dozens of truckloads of very desperately needed supplies were turned away from the beleaguered city of New Orleans by a besieging domestic army on the grounds that the only thing they could enforce, they couldn't enforce civil order within the city. That was too dangerous. By golly, we can enforce this price gouging law. And they said, this has been documented, they said, we can't be sure you won't sell that. We can't be sure you won't sell that. Now, in some cases, these were volunteers, they probably were going to give it away. I bet some of it would have gotten sold. I am willing to say it would have been better to have the products brought in through the besieged city and sold than to keep it out and keep the price at infinity. So your question's a good one. The real reason is the supply response that is engendered by higher prices. And if New Orleans had not had a price gouging law, there would have been trains of material brought into the city. But it was prevented. So it's a good question.
It's interesting. Even if they had brought in these generators and given them away to random people within New Orleans, it's very likely that they would have turned around themselves and have sold it to people who are willing to pay more.
One hopes. Because that would mean that it's going to a higher value use. Now, and it would answer this gentleman's question, because that means that the poor person who had the generator says it's actually worth more to me to sell it. I'd rather have the money. I mean, I need the generator, but it's worth even more to me. So under those circumstances, it's okay that wealthy people have more power.
You said Sweden is mostly like liberal, but
No, Sweden has some liberal policies.
Oh, so because I've never.
Well, if you look at indices of economic freedom, Sweden is really surprisingly high. Now, some of their tax rates are very high, and they have a welfare state, but the way they operate the welfare state is actually in keeping with what many people say are principles like values. So it's an interesting mixed system. So I bet you have never heard that. That's one of the reasons you're here. I hope you heard a lot of stuff you've never heard. Somebody on this side. These people are embarrassing.
Okay, so like with the Katrina example, I'm from here, and I'm just thinking about exchange in general. We had a private contractor come in. I mean, a lot of contractors were coming in.
But not enough.
Not enough, but I mean, a lot were coming in. But we had an issue where he was from like South Carolina. He said he could have our house rebuilt in like 5-6 months, and then we paid him, and he took all the money and he left. So what do you do when you have like it was a voluntary exchange, but like we got screwed over? Oh, okay.
Absolutely not a voluntary exchange. If you have asymmetric information or the inability to sign contracts,
Okay.
it's fraud.
Right.
Fraud is a violation of the common law of contract.
Okay.
And you need something like a state or some kind of court system to solve that problem.
Right.
People always cheat on contracts.
Right.
So I think one of the reasons that guys like that were there was that it was very difficult for legitimate contractors to come in because of price gouging laws.
Right.
So not surprisingly, more shadowy people try to go around the side.
Okay.
New Orleans has a pretty restrictive usury law, which means that payday lending is difficult. And so people go instead to Tony the loan shark, because they're going to get the loan somewhere. You were going to get your house rebuilt somehow, and you weren't able to do it legitimately because the state restricted your ability to contract.
Right.
But absolutely, that was fraud. You need the state to enforce that. It was not voluntary.
Okay.
Fraud's an ancient common law problem. But that's a great question. We need some way of, in fact, let me say another 30 seconds about that. One of the key aspects of human liberty is the ability to be coerced voluntarily. If you and I are considering an exchange that isn't just immediately consummated, I give you the money, you give me the stuff, and we're done, and what I get actually is what I thought it was. But if there's it extends out over time. We need some way, either I have to post a bond that I'll forfeit if I violate the terms of the contract, And so the symbol of this that you should think of is Odysseus, bound to the mast. So in the Odyssey, Odysseus was told by Circe that when you pass the island of the Sirens, the song of the Sirens is so beautiful, so seductive, that you'll just jump in and the island is surrounded just by bones of men who killed themselves because their song was so beautiful. So you need to have your men all stop up their ears with cotton. But you, if you want, can listen to the song. But you have to tell your men to tie you to the mast. And you have to order your men to disobey your orders, because you're going to beg them to let you go. When you do let them go, when you do say, you guys, let me go, I was just kidding, now, come on, let me go, I want to go, they have to bind you even tighter. So what Odysseus did was enter into a contract with his men. I order you to disobey my orders. In the future, I know I'm going to act badly. I want to commit now to be honest. And that means we can have this contract. So you wanted that guy to be able to say, I'm going to build the house, I'll rebuild the house. Well, it's hard to enforce. And so he may need to, in normal circumstances, have a legal system that he could resort to, where he posts a bond or he has a reputation. There's all sorts of things that you might use. But it actually coerces him to obey the terms of the contract. So I want to be able voluntarily to submit to coercion. The problem is when the coercion is involuntary. You and I can't have a real contract unless I can say I will be punished if I violate the contract and have it be credible. So what I want you to imagine is, suppose you're on another ship and you see this guy, he's obviously the captain, and he's bound to the mast. And he's screaming, you guys, let me go! I said let me go! Wouldn't you try to help him? Let's go help him. They tied him to the mast. Well, he doesn't want you to help him. In fact, he went to great lengths to bind himself. So that's what a contract is. A contract is an agreement that binds me because I know that in the future I'm going to want to violate the terms, or I might. And so I have to be subject to some kind of coercion or threat to prevent that. So not all coercion is involuntary. Last question.
Thank you.
Surely someone wants to sum up.
So with the ice example, like obviously like the salt and ice and all that stuff, obviously it's like very simplistic, but like sometimes like I feel like it's a little too simplistic. Like with politics, you often like, I'm imagining Mr. E would see that his wish for having $2 million budget on salt wouldn't happen. But he would be rational enough to realize that sometime down the line there might be another vote that he would rather win. So if you're dealing with that in politics, where like Mr. E's like, all right, Mr. A and Mr. C, let's make it so you guys get what you want. But then down the line, you make sure that I get what I want. Then you're dealing with where the politics aren't going into the middle, they're going to the extremes, to one side or the other. Like how do we start dealing with that?
There are other models of politics, and they're called interest group models, where the intensity of preference and not just the number of proponents is what drives it. I think most of us think those are probably pretty dangerous, that organized interest groups that are trying to get relatively extreme positions are going to be imposing harms on most of the population for relatively narrowly defined benefits. That's not really what politics is about. And so you're right, and that's what most people consider to be another indictment of politics. This is how it works if it works well. If it works badly, an organized interest group like the NRA, or pick your least favorite interest group. But the NRA, I happen that I'm an NRA member, but the NRA is the one that's usually vilified like this. 5 million members, that's not a small group, but it's pretty small compared to 320. And yet the NRA seems to dominate politics. If you ask, a majority of the American public would like to have more restrictive gun control laws, and yet it doesn't happen because this relatively extreme interest group is able to control. They log roll, they lobby members of Congress, and people say that's a bad thing. So the more realistic model of politics is even worse. So in this case, if an interest group had dominated, it probably would have been system computer manufacturers who would have blocked microcomputers, not because they thought they were a bad idea, but precisely because they might be a good idea. And again, we would have lost. But that's a great question. one that we can have today.